Referring to Congresswoman Crockett, I have observed your highly amusing TikToks and impressive engagement metrics. However, similar numbers on social media are generated by cats leaping into containers, and that does not qualify feline creatures to oversee the Judiciary Committee. Matt Gaetz reclined in his witness table seat with the calculated nonchalance of an individual whose mature years were dedicated to camera-based performances, moving sequentially from the Florida State Legislature to the Congressional chambers, followed by Fox News appearances, and currently broadcasting nightly on the 911 America News Network. His attire consisted of a suit exceeding the average American's monthly housing expenses, a necktie fastened with the deliberate nonchalance of someone broadcasting an attitude of indifference, and a smile lacking genuine expression. Approaching 43, Gaetz appeared to be precisely what he was, an individual accustomed to lifelong compliments regarding his appearance, which he confused with having license to act without constraints. Positioned directly behind him was counsel, not of the type intended for witness preparation, but the specialized legal representative who accommodates public figures at official venues to create the perception that serious professionals are managing critical legal issues. This particular attorney utilized a leather briefcase and an unwritten yellow legal notepad, maintaining the countenance of a professional adequately compensated to occupy any given space. The setting was mid-March of 2026, where the House Judiciary Committee assembled for a proceeding focused on systemic failures regarding congressional ethical lapses and safeguards for victimized young people. Arranged weeks earlier, the assembly was catalyzed by the persistent national discourse surrounding the Epstein dossier and widespread public comprehension that influential figures in Washington routinely evaded repercussions for ethical failures, indicating the system was functioning precisely as intended rather than failing. Matt Gaetz appeared voluntarily, having received no formal subpoena demanding his presence. This unexpected participation simultaneously perplexed political journalists and energized cable news outlets. The subject of perhaps the most scathing congressional ethics review in contemporary history, an assessment citing credible indications of severe transgressions involving a young person, unauthorized monetary exchanges, illegal substance consumption, and investigative interference, had autonomously entered a congressional assembly room, occupied a witness seat, and requested to speak. His motivations were obvious to observers cognizant of the financial structures underpinning media driven by provocation. The Matt Gaetz program broadcast on ONN was experiencing a significant loss of viewership. The viewership spikes initially generated by curiosity had normalized into a gradual downward trend, as the audience concluded that a former representative in disrepute haranguing the clandestine bureaucracy was intrinsically less interesting than a current representative engaging in identical behavior. Gaetz required a significant public event, a brief video segment, the opportunity to enter a hostile environment and emerge victorious, ideally with rhetorical trophies representing the downfall of an adversary, which could be distributed prior to the late-night news cycle. He publicized his plan to offer testimony on his broadcast 3 days prior, gazing intently into the lens with the fervor typically associated with those marketing dietary supplements. Asserting he had been subject to 4 years of falsehoods, character attacks, and political targeting without the opportunity to confront his detractors, he claimed that the following Tuesday he would enter the committee room to meet each accuser directly. The production staff anticipated this event would yield the highest ratings in the program's limited run. While they correctly predicted the high viewership, the reasons differed substantially from their expectations. "Observe," Gaetz proceeded, motioning toward the Democratic members on the dais with the casual disdain of an individual who conflated malice with assurance. "I comprehend the methodology and the standard strategies utilized here. Whenever your political faction requires a heavily publicized proceeding, you deploy the female members. It is a repetitive strategy involving the selection of the most reactive individual, placing her before a camera, synchronizing theatrical audio, and allowing a display of sorrow." He declared that this approach was akin to daytime talk television, rather than genuine legislative investigation. He directed his focus across the panel, lingering on each Democratic woman with the contrived entertainment value of someone taking stock of physical merchandise. Candidly evaluate today's roster. This does not resemble a functioning Judiciary Committee proceeding, but rather a theoretical audition process. The assortment includes a member exhibiting high indignation, another prone to weeping, and an individual specialized in TikTok content. Gesturing toward Crockett while looking elsewhere, he clarified without apology that she was the one associated with the social media app. Dispersed and uneasy amusement arose from a segment of Republican aides, typical of reactions prompted by fear of the speaker rather than legitimate humor. Gaetz continued, tilting forward as his facial expression expanded into a look that was genuinely predatory, referencing the precise psychological phenomenon of an individual extracting gratification from distressing those with less influence than himself. My prediction for today is that Congresswoman Crockett will dramatically open her customary portfolio, recite a document using a somber tone, and subsequently glare at me with the expectation of a remorseful response. This constitutes the complete performance, which will predictably cause a social media frenzy and widespread emotional displays, yet alter absolutely nothing because the context is not legal, but rather theatrical. The primary distinction between the stage and jurisprudence is that the latter demands substantiation, while the former merely requires a female participant skilled at appearing distressed. Rotating to face Crockett and finally initiating eye contact, he listed previous investigations by the FBI, Justice Department, House Ethics, and Florida Bar, then asked if she was aware of their collective findings, implying a complete absence. With expansive gestures, he asserted his continued presence was due solely to a total lack of substance in any allegations, claiming everything had been dramatized, identical to the current proceeding. He described the opposing methodology as excessive education, combined with personal unfulfillment among the party's women, who, unable to handle his retaliation, create fictional narratives and weep before cameras. He reclined, exuding the satisfaction typical of an individual concluding what he perceives as an absolutely crushing final statement. He then challenged her to proceed with the document reveal, the emotional tone, and the dramatics, stating his intention to remain seated through the performance. He claimed he would maintain his position indefinitely, asserting that truly innocent people successfully endure politically motivated investigations. The assembly room was devoid of silence, instead crackling with intensity. Observing the Republican members on the panel, numerous individuals became noticeably immobile, ceasing standard supportive behaviors such as nodding or smiling that typically occur when a preferred witness excels. Chairman Jim Jordan, shifting from a carefully casual posture, now leaned forward with hands spread upon the surface before him, appearing like someone who just realized structural collapse was imminent. Concurrently, multiple Democratic members prepared to speak. Aides communicated with urgency, and every device in the press section was actively documenting the scene. Jasmine Crockett remained absolutely motionless and unblinking, neglecting to adjust her posture, utilize her water, or acknowledge the colleagues attempting to support her. She maintained a position with hands clasped upon her sealed document, observing Gaetz with the countenance of an individual receiving something exceeding the value of an insult, the essential truth. This was the comprehensive revelation of Matt Gaetz's true nature, articulated on national broadcast by Gaetz himself. Jordan used his gavel with minimal enthusiasm, starting a standard call for appropriate conduct, but Crockett's response cut through the room with specialized exactness. She stated that she required no intervention regarding Gaetz's terminology, noting she had experienced more challenging language from individuals of higher character. When she requested her allotted time, Jordan paused before conceding and acknowledging the representative from Texas. Crockett instituted a full 5-second silence, during which Gaetz's facial expression initially remained, then wavered, and finally reconstituted itself with obvious difficulty, resembling a digital display freezing and rebooting. Addressing Gaetz, she spoke in a tone that was only slightly amplified beyond a personal discussion. You allocated 3 minutes to explaining that female members are emotionally driven, prone to televised weeping, and that our legislative scrutiny equates to theatrical productions akin to daytime television, suggesting we are excessively educated and personally unfulfilled, while also likening me to a cat entering a container. She then briefly stopped speaking. I express gratitude for that preceding statement, as I intend to spend the next 5 minutes reciting details from a report regarding a homeless 17-year-old female employed at a fast food restaurant. This recitation is necessary because you, a serving member of Congress, the offspring of a state senator, and beneficiary of maximal national privileges, treated her identically to how you just addressed the women present, as an inferior entity, a target for ridicule, and as inconsequential. Unsealing her documents, she noted that the sole distinction in the current context was her access to a microphone, which the individual in question lacked. Regarding Matt Gaetz, on December 23rd of 2024, the House Ethics Committee, a joint panel composed of your peers from both parties, published their findings concerning you. The inquiry spanned nearly 4 years, marked by your refusal to participate, your disregard of a legal subpoena, and your resignation from legislative office occurring precisely when the committee finalized the release of its conclusions. She displayed the physical report, a substantial document with sorted sections and the formal emblem of the House Ethics Committee prominently visible. The panel concluded, in direct quotation, that there was significant proof Representative Gaetz breached House regulations and behavioral standards concerning unauthorized activities, misconduct involving a young person, prohibited drug consumption, improper gifts, specialized preferential treatment, and legislative interference. She allowed the sequential points to resonate: unauthorized behavior, transgressions against a young person, substance use, forbidden gifts, and investigative interference. Our primary focus must be directed toward the individual central to this investigation, not you, Gaetz, but rather the actual subject. She extracted an additional item: unsealed court documents from an associated civil lawsuit dating to October of 2025. The person involved was 17, attending high school as a junior in Florida. Her circumstances included employment at a McDonald's and unstable housing, relying intermittently on a homeless facility. Crockett instituted a momentary break, intended not for theatrical impact, though the silence was profound, but rather to ensure absolute quiet for the succeeding statement. The individual enrolled on an online platform designed to connect men seeking dates with younger female individuals. She misrepresented her age as 18 in order to utilize the service, driven by the desire to accumulate funds for orthodontic dental work. Directing her focus on Gaetz, she emphasized the braces, noting she was merely a juvenile attempting to repair her dental structure. Her attempt resulted in encounters with a web of influential older males, which included your prominent political associate Joel Greenberg. He subsequently admitted guilt to federal minor trafficking charges and is presently incarcerated in a federal penitentiary. Crockett cited the specific ethics findings where 3 eyewitnesses provided verified testimony locating you with the 17-year-old at a July 2017 event hosted at Florida lobbyist Chris Dorworth's residence. The descriptions provided by these observers are documented in the report and are highly incriminating. Replacing the testimony documents, she stated that the ethics panel determined significant evidence indicated you breached Florida statutes regarding young people. A parallel review conducted by the Florida Bar finalized an identical conclusion: substantial proof of misconduct involving a young person. The situation involved independent organizations conducting separate inquiries, yet arriving at the same terminology: substantial evidence. She produced an image from a 2021 Fox News appearance, quoting your nationally televised denial regarding the individual's existence and any relationship with a 17-year-old, labeling the allegations as completely untrue. Discarding the image, she focused on Gaetz with an expression devoid of anger, radiating the absolute certainty of an individual delivering unalterable facts. That individual is real, Gaetz. She was real during her homelessness at 17 during her fast food employment, and when 3 observers witnessed the event at the gathering, and furthermore, she was sufficiently real for both the Ethics Committee and the Florida Bar to validate substantial evidence, and she continues to exist in Florida, processing those experiences while you sit there and claim consistent victory. Gaetz adjusted his position as his previous expression vanished, replaced by a rigid look representing mental calculation rather than shame, given the prerequisite self-awareness for the latter emotion. This was the accelerated analysis of an individual accustomed to lifelong evasion of accountability, currently evaluating the probability of avoiding consequences once more. Addressing the Congresswoman, he spoke in a significantly quieter tone, devoid of his typical theatricality. The Justice Department subjected these claims to multi-year scrutiny, utilizing extensive federal resources, and ultimately opted not to initiate prosecution. This is not my subjective view, but rather the formalized conclusion of professional prosecutors who evaluated all available proof and determined a lack of adequate grounds for filing charges. He angled forward, emphasizing that he was never formally charged, indicted, or convicted, asserting that in the American system those facts carry specific weight. Crockett acknowledged the Justice Department's non-prosecution decision, agreeing it held significance, though differing substantially from his interpretation. Utilizing a document, she clarified that declining to file charges does not equate to a declaration of innocence, a crucial distinction she noted he should understand given his legal education. A non-prosecution decision differs from acquittal, representing a judgment call regarding resource allocation or the likelihood of meeting the highest legal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Discarding the point, she contrasted that high bar with the Ethics Committee's utilization of the substantial evidence standard, a lesser, yet still significant metric. That designation indicates the proof is verifiable, believable, and weighty, and it is the identical measurement used by the Florida Bar to reach their congruent conclusion. Focusing on him, she reinterpreted his statement. The claim of not being charged effectively admits that while proof was sufficient for 2 organizations to establish likelihood, it fell short of the specific requirement for a third entity's prosecution. This scenario does not constitute innocence, but rather highlights a systemic loophole which you have inhabited with considerable ease. As Gaetz prepared to speak, Crockett immediately produced another document, pivoting to discuss a larger behavioral trend rather than a solitary event as outlined in the report. Displaying fiscal documentation, she cited committee findings that you frequently compensated female individuals for their company via digital payment services, such as Venmo and Cash App. These occurred systematically rather than in isolation, involving several recipients and recurrent transactions over time, coordinated by your political associate, Joel Greenberg. She displayed Greenberg's legal records, referencing the former Seminole County tax official and friend's 2021 guilty plea to 6 federal offenses, one of which concerned minor trafficking. This involved the identical young person mentioned in your ethics review, and Greenberg is now serving his resulting federal prison term. Replacing the file, she identified Greenberg as the central facilitating figure who introduced you to these women and organized the interactions, and subsequently collaborated with federal agents following his arrest. He provided information regarding you, she noted, focusing on Gaetz and emphasizing that his closest Florida political ally is presently in federal custody for trafficking the specific girl Gaetz claims is fictional. He admitted guilt and detailed the events to prosecutors, yet you appear here asserting consistent victory. Following a break, she corrected him, stating he had merely escaped consequences rather than won, and noted the profound distinction between the two, despite his probable desire to blur that difference. Gaetz attempted to interrupt, angling toward the microphone with the assertive posture characteristic of individuals used to dominating cable news segments. He argued that Joel Greenberg is a felon willing to make any statement necessary to mitigate his prison term. That is the standard operation for cooperating witnesses, providing prosecutors with desirable narratives. Every defense lawyer understands this. Crockett cut him off, using a tone that was soft yet unyielding. I concur that Joel Greenberg is a convicted felon, presently incarcerated for minor trafficking, involving the exact minor the Ethics Committee links to you. The same child that 3 separate observers swore was present at the same gathering as you." She then clasped her hands. "Thus, your argument requires that the felon who facilitated your meetings with young females is lying. The 3 observers are fabricating stories. The joint ethics panel is being untruthful, and the Florida bar is also lying, with you being the singular honest participant." She allowed the preceding statement to resonate with the weight of a final judgment, observing that eventually, the required sheer volume of liars needed to sustain his honesty itself constitutes proof. "We will now address your public interactions with women, moving beyond the private evidence already cited, as this trend extends past private locations and financial applications. It manifests at speaking engagements, in social media communications, and within the halls of Congress itself." She utilized a video transcription from a July 2022 Turning Point USA Student Action Conference. During that Tampa gathering before thousands of youths, she read his exact statements labeling pro-choice participants as repulsive and making offensive comments regarding the physical appearance of female rally members. Turning the page, she recited further descriptions utilizing repulsive imagery and derogatory physical assessments of the women protesting. You then publicly ridiculed their need for physical activity and dietary changes. Discarding the transcript, she noted that when questioned by reporters about these statements, your brief response was, "Be offended." She then produced a verified social media post dated May 2022, corresponding with the leak of the Supreme Court's draft to overturn Roe v. Wade. In that post, you speculated that female protesters were excessive educated, unfulfilled millennials returning to solitary meals and lacking social prospects. Discarding the image, she cited a Newsmax interaction where, concerning the loss of female supporters, you stated a derogatory trade-off involving stereotyped names representing various demographics. This used disparaging slang for specific women and stereotypical identifiers for minority men, effectively marginalizing multiple demographic groups into comedic targets. Addressing Gaetz directly, she emphasized the temporal context. These repulsive, insulting public comments about adult women occurred while you were subject to an active federal inquiry regarding interactions with a minor. You engaged in public ridicule of adult appearances, concurrent with Justice Department investigations into potential exploitation of a homeless minor. She allowed this stark contrast to settle, and the resulting absolute silence amplified minimal ambient noise into significance. This extends beyond standard political behavior, exceeding even hypocrisy, which is defined by a disconnect between belief and statement. Your actions constitute a different phenomenon. Utilized public aggression toward women as a diversionary tactic regarding private conduct involving a young female. You manufactured humor about other people's looks to shield your own actions from scrutiny. She used another Newsmax transcript wherein, when questioned about declining female support, you asserted a specific demographic exchange involving stereotyped names. Within a single statement, you utilized disparaging slang for certain women, treating them as discardable, while simultaneously objectifying minority men via stereotypes as interchangeable political components. Discarding the transcription, she concluded the view presented women as expendable and minority men as implements, arguing this was indicative of a worldview that objects other people rather than being a legitimate strategy. She extracted a subsequent piece of evidence directly from the ethics compilation, utilizing tabbed pages. Furthermore, it exceeded mere public address. The committee determined you presented sexually explicit photographs of female individuals to fellow members within the congressional chamber itself. She emphasized the setting. This occurred not in private or a corridor, but on the very floor of the House. This is the identical location where historical debates on women's suffrage occurred, where protections against gender-based violence were enacted, and where human trafficking laws originated. You occupied that historic space and circulated sexually explicit images of women among male colleagues with the casualness typical of sharing travel snapshots. Focusing on the Republican members, she noted the investigation failed to establish that these female individuals permitted their likenesses to be distributed to congressional members. The report merely documents the act of displaying the images, reducing the subjects once more to entertainment content devoid of personal dignity or privacy. From this section, she produced one concluding piece of evidence, a journalistic report concerning Andrew Cluster. Consider further your staff management. In 2024, you employed Andrew Cluster as specialized legal counsel for your D.C. operations. Mr. Cluster used social platforms to overtly label himself, in direct quotation, as extremely hostile toward women. His social media activity included a desire for a female partner appearing to have suffered physical assault. Concurrent with his employment, he was subject to criminal prosecution in Texas concerning domestic assault resulting in physical harm. Discarding the report, she summarized, "You engaged an individual self-identified as having extreme animosity toward women, facing domestic violence charges, and placed him within a national legislative office." She referenced the adage suggesting identity can be determined via social associations. Your close associates encompass an incarcerated felon convicted of minor exploitation and an avowed detractor of women accused of domestic abuse. You extended employment to both individuals. Gaetz's legal representative inclined urgently toward him, though Gaetz once more used a hand gesture to signal him away, with the motion appearing less dismissive and more clearly agitated this time. The physical motion resembled an individual attempting to repel an unseen irritant. Addressing the Congresswoman, he argued that Andrew Cluster's social communications were personal matters, and the pending charges were, "I am not requesting that you formulate a defense for Andrew Cluster, but rather demanding an explanation for a repetitive behavioral trend." When a political associate is jailed for minor trafficking, a staff member claims extreme misogyny. An ethics investigation confirms you distributed explicit images on the legislative floor. 3 verified accounts link you to a minor, and you publicly label women as repulsive and hateful. At what specific threshold does this consistent pattern solidify as your defining character traits? She proceeded immediately without allowing a reply. She subsequently addressed the official appointment attempt, extracting a chronological record dated November 2024. On that specific date, following the entirety of these events, including federal and ethics inquiries, Greenberg's conviction, and the victim testimony, the U.S. President officially selected you to become Attorney General. This position constitutes the primary law enforcement official for the country, tasked with supervising trafficking prosecutions and child protection efforts. Addressing the Assembly, she summarized that the President evaluated an individual with credible indications of minor exploitation and declared him the ideal candidate to lead the Justice Department and enforce laws safeguarding young people. Following a break, she noted that Republican senators rejected this, as members of your political faction analyzed the facts and declined your confirmation. You subsequently retracted your candidacy 8 days later because the substantiating evidence was too massive for even your standard political allies to disregard. Discarding the chronological record, she contrasted his claim of consistent victory with the reality that his own party prevented him from managing the nation's legal authority. That scenario constitutes removal by your own allies based on performance metrics rather than victory. Prior to concluding, one final item concerning this specific venue requires attention. She motioned towards the environment of the assembly room, indicating the formal architectural elements, the dais, the national symbols, and the broadcast equipment. The investigation confirmed that you displayed explicit photographs of women to peers within the legislative chamber itself, not privately or in transit. She allowed this stark visual to resonate, referencing the identical locations synonymous with major civil rights enactments, gender violence protections, and anti-trafficking legislation. You occupied a space dedicated to democratic processes and circulated sexually explicit images of women among male colleagues with the casualness typical of sharing trading cards. Focusing on the Republican members, she cited investigation conclusions that you utilized official status to facilitate a passport acquisition for an associated female individual via false representations to the State Department regarding her constituent status. You exploited the authority inherent in your legislative position to advance private wrongdoing. This transcends personal behavior and constitutes a breach of public confidence. She consolidated all presented evidence, including the ethics findings, bar conclusions, legal filings, financial logs, speech transcriptions, social media posts, associate records, staffing articles, and appointment chronologies, into a singular collection. Gaetz adopted a final defensive posture, leaning forward with fixed jaw and severe gaze, divested of his youthful casualness and appearing trapped and frantic, revealing his genuine persona for the initial time in the proceeding. He asserted his familial status, stating in a constrained tone that he possessed a spouse, a child, and consistent family support. He claimed his spouse remained supportive through all politically motivated investigations, arguing that her continued presence and daily loyalty disproved the characterizations made against him. This constituted his remaining significant defense asset, the utilization of family loyalty as definitive character testimony implied through mere presence rather than spoken word. Crockett's reply was instant, subdued, and absolutely crushing. While expressing generic satisfaction regarding your familial support and spouse's affection, this holds zero relevance concerning the potential exploitation of a homeless 17-year-old minor. Numerous individuals possess affectionate spouses and children, yet a subset of those people also inflict harm upon young people outside their family unit. One reality does not negate the other. Following a break, she noted that his defense heavily utilized his wife, an adult with agency in her relationship choices, whereas the official report concerned an individual lacking that autonomy. The investigation addresses a juvenile devoid of options, subjected to unstable housing, fast food employment, and forced interaction with influential figures via a trafficking organization managed by your closest associate. Your marital relationship does not obscure the documented reality of the juvenile detailed in the findings. Gaetz withdrew as his legal counsel placed a stabilizing hand upon his arm, doing so deliberately rather than frantically, indicating comprehension that his client's continued speech was counterproductive and that immediate silence was the optimal legal approach. In an unprecedented move, Gaetz opted not to speak further. She proceeded, asserting that his presence was calculated to generate broadcast material, a brief video segment, the opportunity for witty retort, the absorption of generic criticism, and an ultimate claim of victory to his audience. Rising, she declared that victory was never achieved. Rather, he sequentially evaded consequences via various systemic loopholes that failed to hold similar individuals responsible. Evasion occurred via the Justice Department's non-prosecution decision, the loss of Ethics Committee authority due to resignation, and the closure of the bar case. Subsequent to each avoidance of accountability, you publicly ridiculed the female figures unable to escape your actions. Lowering her tone to a gravity exceeding any amplification, she noted a young female in Florida unable to evade circumstances, specifically a homeless 17-year-old fast food worker seeking funds for dental work. The protective mechanisms designed for such individuals failed, resulting in her inclusion in the precise ethics documentation you attempted to avoid. Despite your main associate's federal incarceration, 3 verified accounts, and findings of significant proof from 2 organizations, you publicly declared on national television that she was fictional. Directing her final gaze at Gaetz, she summarized his insult strategy, labeling female members with reductive stereotypes, comparing her to an animal in a container, analogizing scrutiny to daytime talk television, speculating on personal unfulfillment, and utilizing 3 minutes to broadcast to millions that women have no place in the venue. Following a break, She asserted that the juvenile detailed in the findings, whom you claimed was non-existent, was also female, specifically a 17-year-old child. All intended protective institutions failed her, including the Justice Department, the Ethics Panel via jurisdiction loss, and the State Bar. No support originated from the current legislative venue. Selecting a document from her portfolio, identified as proposed legislation, she announced the immediate introduction of the Protection of Exploited Minors Act. The proposed law seeks to remove temporal restrictions on prosecuting offenses against minors when involving public officials and government workers. Furthermore, it demands that the Justice Department provide public justification when opting against prosecution in cases where a congressional ethics inquiry establishes significant proof of misconduct involving a juvenile. Additionally, it institutes a lifetime prohibition against federal employment, appointment, or nomination for any individual subject to similar investigative conclusions. Replacing the document, she stated that the existence of this legislation 2 years prior would have precluded your nomination for Attorney General. An individual with credible indications of minor exploitation would have been automatically disqualified from consideration to lead the national entity tasked with prosecuting trafficking and abuse. Sealing her documents, she stated that while Gaetz sought personal victory, the proceeding concerned the specific 17-year-old minor he claimed was fictional. The focus was on the systemic loopholes facilitating his evasion of responsibility and preventing future individuals implicated by similar evidence from utilizing legislative venues for performative claims of triumph. She resumed her seat and yielded the floor. The assembly did not react noisily. Instead, it maintained a profound and more powerful silence. This resembled the quietude characteristic of receiving a definitive medical analysis rather than an explosion. It was the type of collective hush where every participant is simultaneously digesting the identical shocking event that just occurred. Gaetz remained immobile at the witness location for 4 seconds, a duration equivalent to an age for an individual accustomed to instantaneous verbal output. His counsel's hand maintained contact, the writing pad remained unwritten, and the facial expression that initiated the assembly was replaced by a rigid, contrived look. It was the countenance of an individual struggling to configure their facial expression acceptably under the scrutiny of millions of viewers. He leaned into the microphone, attempting to state he had appeared in good faith to discuss. Jordan cut him off with immediate speed, indicating extreme eagerness to terminate the interaction, stating his time allotment was concluded. The panel then announced a standard 15-minute break. Gaetz rose, fastened his coat, and proceeded to exit at a deliberate speed, clearly intending for the broadcast to capture a calm departure. The broadcast focus had shifted entirely, with every camera directed toward Crockett, who remained seated, utilizing a legal pad and ignoring his exit. Her optimal strategy for impact was precisely what she executed: immediate advancement past the event. The specific video segment achieved 60 million views within 1 day. However, neither the detailed ethics findings, the financial records, nor the new legislative proposal drove this massive online dissemination. Viral status resulted from a single specific interaction that would ultimately characterize the entire proceeding, the surrounding month, and Matt Gaetz's subsequent public existence. The defining instant occurred when Gaetz used stereotypical labels for the female members and analogized Crockett to a feline entering a container. Gaetz intended this remark as comedic material to marginalize all female participants for his specific audience base. Crockett, however, capitalized on the statement, utilizing it to structure her entire subsequent argument. He specifically referenced her quote identifying the individual in the findings, whom Gaetz claimed was non-existent, as also being a woman and a child. In one statement, this unified Gaetz's generalized disrespect for women with the unique susceptibility of the individual in the allegations. The abstract was codified, transforming a standard political proceeding into a moral evaluation. This achieved results unmet by 4 years of inquiries and media reporting, causing the public to view the minor not as a judicial matter, political data point, or liability, but as a specific 17-year-old fast food employee desiring dental work. Extremely rapidly, a specific hashtag concerning her juvenile status became major trending content internationally. Numerous women utilized social media to share personal images from their 17th year, in school attire, fast food employment, social events, or featuring braces, utilizing a congruent caption regarding their own age at the time. Relatives shared images of younger family members, and educators contributed images of students with concealed identities, accompanied by messages emphasizing the presence of similar young people in their environments and advocating for better treatment. Analysts observed this was the primary instance where the Gaetz ethical issues transcended mere political reporting to become a universal narrative impacting audiences internationally and across party lines, resonating in personal spaces with anyone who has personal connections to that age. On the succeeding Monday, ON halted the Matt Gaetz program, motivated not by ethical considerations, but rather the rapid withdrawal of sponsorship by 6 major advertisers within 1 week and the pending loss of 3 additional sponsors. Publicly, the organization claimed the broadcast was paused due to scheduling conflicts. Privately, an ONN official conveyed the actual motivation to a journalist via unofficial channels. The specific clips involving social media references are receiving constant national coverage, causing public calls to sponsors, monetizing programming, featuring an individual insulting women on air who subsequently faces credible allegations concerning a homeless minor is commercially unviable. Within 2 weeks, ON terminated the broadcast permanently. Gaetz's production entity published a release concerning the pursuit of alternative options, yet no resulting projects developed. A civil lawsuit was publicized 11 days following the committee proceeding. Counsel representing the individual, currently in her mid-20s, submitted a civil filing in federal court for Florida's Middle District, identifying Gaetz as a defendant and requesting compensation for injuries, emotional trauma, and conspiratorial acts. The documentation emphasized that civil litigation merely demands a preponderance of proof, a significantly reduced requirement compared to the criminal standard that had previously protected Gaetz. It referenced the ethics panel conclusions, the state bar conclusions, and the swore accounts of 3 observers. Gaetz's legal team submitted a request for dismissal, which the presiding judge rejected. Consequently, following 4 years of various investigations, non-prosecution decisions, and case closures, Matt Gaetz would be legally required to enter a courtroom, confront the individual making the allegations, and provide sworn testimony. This environment would not be a performative legislative hearing or a media appearance allowing for narrative spin, but a structured courtroom governed by rules and actual repercussions for non-compliance. Simultaneously, the Florida bar publicized the reopening of their inquiry into Gaetz's professional conduct, citing massive public concern and fresh information. Judicial experts observed that potential findings of violations could result in Gaetz's suspension or permanent disbarment, effectively stripping him of his legal license, which was his final professional qualification. While a prior suspension occurred in 2021 regarding administrative fees, the current situation involved vastly higher stakes. Don Gaetz, Matt's parent and a prominent Florida political figure recently re-elected to the state Senate, faced questioning regarding the proceeding during a Pensacola community event 2 weeks subsequently. He hesitated significantly at the lectern prior to responding to the assembly of voters, composed largely of long-term supporters favoring him for decades due to his reputation as a stable, productive legislator focused on infrastructure and avoiding scandal. Expressing generic paternal affection, he declined to offer commentary on the legislative assembly or the legal actions. A local journalist observed that this instance marked the primary occasion throughout Matt Gaetz's career that his parent refused to offer a defense. Don Gaetz previously supported Matt through federal inquiries, ethics investigations, and the appointment issues, utilizing press appearances, public statements, legal engagement, and political influence on his behalf. In this specific instance, he offered a brief 7-word statement and departed immediately, refusing additional inquiries. The journalist documented that the speaker's hands were trembling. For Matt Gaetz, whose professional life relied fundamentally on familial branding, influence, finances, and public loyalty, this brief statement was more damaging than any formal legal action. While legal challenges are standard and inquiries can be endured, a public familial disavowal on national broadcast constitutes an injury resistant to legal remediation. Rapidly, political adversaries in Don Gaetz's jurisdiction utilized digital advertising pairing the committee footage with the senior Gaetz's concise reply. These advertisements avoided direct character attacks, instead presenting the 2 distinct video segments concurrently, allowing constituents to finalize their own assessment regarding a political structure that had ultimately collapsed under its accumulated stress. The Cameo platform, specializing in personalized celebrity video content, silently deleted Gaetz's user profile following an enormous influx of complaints reported by their official representative. Subsequent to leaving legislative office, Gaetz utilized the service to sell video messages at a rate of $250 per transaction. Although this deletion was relatively minor within the comprehensive context of his downfall, it held significant symbolic value. Even the commercial sector, based on direct celebrity engagement, deemed him too reputationally hazardous to accommodate. The proposed legislation immediately gathered 14 supporting legislators within 21 days, notably encompassing 2 Republican women representing suburbs heavily impacted by the viral movement concerning the child's status. Journalists began utilizing the term Gaetz Bill, linking his name permanently not to his political achievements or media presence, but rather to a legal structure created to forbid the very actions indicated by investigation findings against him. Gaetz released a statement via his legal team, labeling the proposal as a personal vendetta driven by politics rather than legitimate legislation. His dismissal generated negligible media interest, contrasting sharply with the massive coverage devoted to the proposed law. This severe lack of proportional attention was a novel situation for Gaetz. Chronologically, for the primary instance in his career, his official statements held zero relevance to the public. 3 weeks subsequent to the assembly, an individual waited in the corridor adjacent to the Judiciary Panel's offices as Crockett departed a staffing conference. The woman was approximately in her 50s, attired in a sweater and practical footwear, utilizing visual aids and a lanyard identifying her as an educator from a Florida public secondary school. Addressing the Congresswoman, she rose from a seating area where she had been utilizing a red writing utensil for grading purposes. Identifying herself as Linda Harwell, a 10th grade instructor from Jacksonville, she explained she had autonomously driven 14 hours rather than flying, needing the duration to finalize her intended statement. She placed her hands upon a collection of academic submissions, which Crockett observed contained detailed instructor feedback in the borders. The instructor asserted that similar young women are enrolled in her courses annually, in significant numbers. These are juveniles aged 16 to 17, experiencing unstable family environments, utilizing temporary housing, or balancing dual employment, resulting in extreme fatigue during academic hours. She spoke with the practiced clarity typical of an educator experienced in adolescent environments, capable of projecting authority without amplification. Perusing the ethics findings and noting the description of the homeless 17-year-old catalyzed a strong memory of a specific former student from 3 years prior in identical circumstances, working fast food and utilizing her vehicle for shelter. Describing that individual as intelligent and withdrawn, the teacher noted she was the type of person who unobtrusively completed tasks and avoided requesting assistance, having internalized the futility of seeking help. Following a break, she admitted ignorance regarding the student's subsequent fate, yet expressed profound concern, arguing that young women devoid of financial security, support systems, or familial protection become vulnerable to scenarios described in the findings not through personal errors, but due to a complete lack of viable alternatives. Directing her focus on Crockett, she referenced observing the proceeding and hearing the details concerning orthodontic needs, fast food employment, and housing instability, which prompted relief that the individual was finally recognized as a human child rather than a mere political or judicial issue. Capitol participants dedicated 4 years to debating Gaetz's prosecution potential, yet simultaneously neglected to inquire about the welfare of the minor. She extracted a specific page from her materials, an official summary of the proposed Protection of Exploited Minors Act. The teacher explained she posted this documentation in her workspace, catalyzing a query from a specific current student named Destiny, who bears a strong resemblance to the minor in the report, regarding whether this prevents individuals from avoiding accountability permanently. Her vocal delivery became constrained momentarily, indicating increased emotional tension rather than complete breakdown. I struggled to respond accurately because my extensive career teaching indicates that the truthful answer has consistently been that powerful individuals routinely evade responsibility and the system ignores people in her demographic. Focused on the document in her possession, she suggested a shift in narrative might be possible, conveying that although completion is uncertain, a representative publicly advocated for her significance over a powerful adversary within an official assembly. Crockett clasped the visitor's hand, acknowledging the extreme travel time undertaken to deliver the specific message that student Destiny, and ideally the minor central to the case, are currently observing events. She noted the proceeding transcended Gaetz personally, addressing instead the pervasive systemic failures regarding believing female individuals in vulnerable situations. Crockett maintained physical contact while instructing the teacher to assure Destiny of the proposed law's validity, its increasing legislative support, and its potential to legally prevent any future official from committing similar acts indicated by evidence and subsequently publicly celebrating a lack of consequences. Advise her regarding systemic delays and functional failures impacting individuals daily while emphasizing concurrent active reform efforts. Urge her to maintain vigilant focus. Linda Harwell agreed, consolidating her academic materials and the legislative document, then proceeded deliberately toward the egress, carrying the dual weight of significant impending travel and professional experience motivated by a student awaiting resolution. Crockett remained stationary in the corridor subsequent to the guest's departure, surrounded by the specific stillness characteristic of official buildings late in the day, following the cessation of hearings and media activity inhabited only by administrative staff. Her device activated with a message from the primary legislative partner indicating 2 additional Republican female legislators from districts heavily impacted by the viral movement had extended support, suggesting viable passage potential. Storing the device, she focused on the concept of a viable pathway as the ultimate goal, not a certainty or final destination, but rather an opportunity for systemic change, ensuring future vulnerable 17-year-old minors encounter proactive support systems rather than experiencing trauma that later results in prolonged political debates regarding accountability. Matt Gaetz attended the proceed in pursuit of personal triumph, seeking a performative video segment to revitalize his inactive professional trajectory and validate his immunity to systemic consequences. Conversely, systemic accountability finally reached him. Originating not from legal prosecution, investigative panels devoid of authority, or closed regulatory inquiries. The catalyst for accountability was the most fundamental democratic mechanism available: a female participant publicly reciting verifiable facts and preventing their erasure by an adversary. Gaetz presently faced a civil proceeding, broadcast termination, imminent professional license scrutiny, public abandonment of defense by his parent, and name association with legislation created to forbid the precise behavior indicated by investigative findings against him. In Florida, an individual currently in her mid-20s, formerly a vulnerable homeless 17-year-old fast food employee, prepared for her primary legal opportunity in 7 years to address these events in court. Crockett returned to her personal workspace, finding a fresh collection of documents awaiting her, as was customary. She occupied her seat, unsealed the materials, and engaged her writing implement. Official duties proceeded, as they invariably must, because every instance of a triumphant adversary celebrating perceived success is balanced by a silenced victim requiring public advocacy and a standardized recitation of the facts. She maintained her professional focus.